folks, and welcome back to Big Pete's Guitar Emporium. Now, of all the videos I've done over the last few years about my part in the history of the guitar and the history of music really, the one thing I've missed out, of course, is the history of the bass guitar, which is this baby. Now, right through from the beginning of time to classical orchestras, right through to the 20s, 30s, everybody was using an upright bass. The old wooden thing that they used to play, you know, in that sort of Charlie Mingus, which was fine for jazz and those things. And then they sort of developed the walking bass, which came all that stuff. Then in the 1950s there was this shift to smaller bands, and those of you who are familiar with the sort of rockabilly thing, there was a particular guy called Fred Maddox who played with an outfit called the Maddox Brothers and Rose, who was the bass player. Now the band was pretty big, they had about 6 in the band, loads of horrible kids playing guitars, running around showing off, and poor old Fred was getting left out. So he developed the more, well, they call it a rockabilly slap these days. I don't think I can do it on this. But it was the no, I can't. So that was the late 50s. So anyway, at the time, the bass players were all getting squeezed out because of this noise thing. All the guitars were now electrified, getting louder and louder, and the poor bass players left out. So it was at that point, in about 50, 51, something like that, I had a phone call from Leo Fender, who I'd done some work with before, working on his prototypes for some of his early guitars. And he called me over, and so I went round to his place, and we had a nice cup of tea, and his wife made a lovely carrot cake then. Where was I? Carrot cake? Oh, not carrot cake. So we had, he said he wanted to develop a bass version of his Fender guitars, but he'd sort of come to a bit of a wall. He didn't have the time, I think, to develop it himself, and he knew, you know, if you could get somebody expert to have a go at this, it would be me. So I borrowed a couple of old guitars of his, a couple of old Fenders, and some parts, necks, the old single pickup. And I said, well, I'll go away and think about it and I'll work this out. So went back to my workshop. After 2 or 3 months of playing around with the parts he'd given me, I worked out that firstly the pickups were, the single pickup just seemed to give a hum on the bass end frequencies, about 60 cycles normally, and this was really annoying. So I had to work out a system where that hum just disappeared, whereas the whole project was going to be hopeless. So what I came up with was splitting the coils. So the 2 pickups are here. So we've got, normally we'd have traditionally you'd have 1. So I split it into 2. So we've got 2 separate coils. This guitar you probably wouldn't recognise, because this is the first bass guitar electric ever made. So this is the one I cobbled together out of parts in my workshop to demonstrate to Leo the theory behind how this was going to work. Starting at the top end, the necks he gave me were a bit on the thin side, so I crafted this piece out of maple. It was actually an old cricket bat at one stage, which I'd taken to America with me, but it sacrificed itself for the cause, because I knew that with the strength of these strings, these are much chunkier than any guitar string that Leo had come up with before. So these are especially wound for me. The neck had to be thicker, chunkier. So I thought, well, I'll get this old maple cricket bat. I gave that to my friend who was a turner, wood turner. He then carved that down for me. That's the neck. And it gives you the strength to really put some strength onto these, some pluck onto these strings. Now, the theory of that is, and you'll see, I don't know if you can see on here, there's the arch at the back and the black at the front. Now, this is made, in theory, the same way that an old British longbow was made. You needed super strength, but the ability to bend the wood. So this is made in a very English longbow way. So the maple on the back gives you the strength and the bend, and the top bit, the black bit, which is actually mahogany on here, this black bit, gives you the strength to pull it back again. So that's the neck. I then needed some keys to put my tunings on. None of the keys that Leo gave me, they were nice, they're little pearl tiddly, you know, normally of course they're 6-string, and they were useless, they were no good. You know, most bass players have got hands like that, you know. So these are actually, I say this is a pre-Fender guitar, so these are actually keys off one of my parents' wardrobes. I just cut them off at the neck and welded them onto some traditional but chunked up pegs. This is, of course, it's just a demo really. So that was made, that's how that was made. Jack plug in the front, in there, just mainly for, I mean, we changed it later on to the socket on the side and all kinds of ways, but that was just, this is just a demo, so it had to work somehow. This one's got a bit of a tone pot. It's not very good on this one because these pickups were sort of demo ones, not very built for good sound. And of course a volume knob. Now, one of the things I was developing, and we was talking to Leo about these guitars, was bass resonance. Now, a lot of the work we did, and some of the bass players we were talking to, we found out most bass players are actually fat. I don't know why that is, why fat blokes make better bass players, but they do. I can't. There's a couple of others that came up later on, you know, John Paul Jones with Zeppelin, and John Entwistle was, you know, wasn't fat, but he was, you know borderline. So we found that if you snuck the whole guitar into the body, it actually made a much more bassier sound. The bass resonance from this wood went straight through the larger body and gave it a much fatter, thumpier tone. So this one, of course, then we developed this cut in the bottom, which was standard on some of Leo's guitars, but this one specifically for bass players. What I developed it was this chamfer in here. Now, this specifically built for fat people. So Leo said, well, it's just to get under your belly, isn't it? I said, well, yeah. He said, well, it's just a belly cut. I said, that's what it is, it's just the belly cut. So from now on, most of the bass guitars around the world have this chamfer just for fat bass players, really. It's all it's there for. But it does the job. And bass players who are a bit on the larger size, it sits absolutely lovely. It sits on your leg nice, tucks in, and then the bass notes resonate through the body and the pickups through your carcass. So inside all your bits, you can actually feel the bass. And that's part of the bass player's skill, is feeding that bass inside you. So it really is a fat bloke's instrument, really. Where do we go from there? Right, so the bass guitar style, once this is developed and Leo okays it, he then goes into production. And he loves these basses. He can't believe he couldn't come up with it himself. And he said, Pete, he said, as a tribute to the work you've put into this, I want to call this one of these basses after you. So some of you may be familiar with the P bass, which of course is named after me. And I said to Leo, that's very kind of you. You know, he's a lovely bloke, Leo. So the P bass developed from me, from Pete, and this bass guitar, which is actually, you know, priceless now. It never goes out of this studio. It never goes away from the UK to the States anymore. It's been to a couple of museums, of course, but Yeah, original pre-Fender guitar. Right, some of the styles that came along. So originally, let me just, this isn't very loud because this is going through a very old practice amp on the floor. But you had the older traditional, I don't really have bass players' fingers, they're quite fat, but you really have to have fat fingers to be bass player. So traditionally you have the so in the early 50s they were just bass players were basically playing along with the drummer. So you'd be just playing along with the, you know. Well, it's a 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready and go bang go, don't you step on the blue suede shoes. That sort of, you know. Right, so then we get on to the 60s. Motown Stax really loved the bass guitar. It's used as a lead instrument in loads of their stuff. I did a lot of work for Stax. Nothing to do with Motown really. You were either in one camp or the other, and I thought the Stax thing was doing more innovative stuff, so I stayed with them for 5 years. And a lot of those tracks you hear now, the classic Stax things, is all me. I really enjoyed myself time there. Lovely guys, and all the time we were developing new songs, and even things like sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the bird travel away was one of mine. What else? Yeah, whatever. Yeah, and then of course in the late 60s, bands like the Who were really racking up the bass thing. John Entwistle. I actually made 2 Pacific bass guitars for him because he could wreck the things. At one particular show at Wembley, Pete Townsend was smashing up the guitar every gig and getting a bit of the glory at the end. It was all a bit, you know, girly. So John said, well, I'm going to have a go at that. So I said, well, hang on a minute, those guitars he's smashing up, you know, they're bits of old thin wood, you know. This thing is a lump of wood. And he said, no, that's all right, be fine, be fine. So at the end of the show, right at the end, so I quickly turned the power off so there's no feedback from it, because it would shake the PA to bits if this started feeding back through the PA. He turned around, swung it at poor old Keith Moon, and whereas the other lead guitars would just smash to bits on the drum kit, this actually took off a tom-tom, smashed a load of cymbals up, poor old Keith Moon fell off the stool, this thing flew across the stage, hit the wall at the back, dropped down the back. Keith Moon looked petrified. John had to apologise to him after the show. Anyway, I went and picked the guitar up. It was very similar to this. And do you know what? It was actually in tune. And we continued to use that one for several other gigs. Then of course the late 70s comes along, and along comes the horrible disco funk thing. I don't really do the funk thing, it's not my, it's not me at all. So I jumped out at that point. I was doing more guitar work, not much bass stuff at all. I left them to it. But they're still using this same basic guitar. The manufacturers, of course, are making them at the time. I went off for a while and worked for a guy called Rick, who was developing his own company. His company was actually called Rick and Backer. There was 2 brothers, Rick, and this bloke called Dave Backer. So the Rick and Backer guitar, I worked on that. That was another development of mine, completely different to this. Used by the Jam and lots of other bands. It's a great effect. So yeah, Rick's still good. He's still about. I don't think Dave Backer's still about though. Anyway, so that was a good guitar that I developed. Then we come into the 80s, and you're starting to get back to a bit more rootsy with the bass. So all that time, obviously you've seen some of the previous videos, you know I did a lot of work with U2. So they're just doing the old on a New Year's Day, that sort of thing. Other songs we did, well, the ones we do U2 that were really bass dominant. When you live on a street with no name. That of course was the original version of that song. So U2 used a lot of the guitars. I did quite a lot of those U2 songs. Of course then it comes up to date now and it's all gone electronic, and the bass players being subsided a bit by all these electronic keyboards that make horrible bass notes, but they don't have the same tone, they don't have the same. You put one of these babies through a PA system and you can crunch all your bones with it. Those electronic ones, they're just whack, 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 it's nothing the same. And to make really good sound blues, you don't need to have volume to make them really, really bassy. So Martin, listen to what she says. Don't plug your amp in and turn it up to halfway, or else you'll be in trouble with your missus. Told you. Yeah, so that's really it, guys. The history of the bass guitar. I hope you've enjoyed this informative little video. I hope to see you further on down the line there. Take care, folks.